Chapter 3. The Magical Sword Faces the Swords of Elfland. As Alveric reached the edge of the enchanted forest, he noticed something strange. The light around him hadn't changed at all. It hadn't dimmed like sunset, nor had it brightened like morning. It just was, constant, glowing, dreamlike. This light wasn't like anything from the world he had left behind. It didn't come from the sun or the moon. It wasn't warm like daylight or cool like moonbeams. No shadows shifted, no golden rays danced, and yet everything shimmered softly, as if lit from within by ancient magic. It reminded him of those rare moments back home, when the world suddenly feels unreal for a second, like time is paused, and a golden silence takes over. Maybe those moments are tiny cracks, tiny leaks, where the magic of Elfland slips through into our world for just a breath. But here, in this land of dreams, that feeling wasn't a moment. It was the whole sky. A tall row of pine trees stood silently like ancient guards at the forest's edge, their dark branches heavy and brooding. Ivy curled up their trunks like green veins, climbing high into the shadows of their blackened foliage. They weren't just trees, they looked like watchers, holding the border between the known and the unknown. Beyond them, the silver spires of Elfland's palace sparkled like they were the source of the mysterious blue glow that bathed the entire land. As if the light itself flowed from their towers, making the air shimmer with silent magic. Now deep inside Elfland and standing before the kingdom's enchanted heart, Alveric felt the weight of mystery pressing around him. He knew this land was not unguarded, so before stepping into the shadowed woods, he reached to his side and drew his father's old sword, the one that had tasted battle. Its steel caught the strange light, gleaming like a promise. On his back, slung over his left shoulder, the newer sword, the magical one, still rested quietly in its fresh scabbard, waiting. The instant Alveric stepped past one of the towering pine sentinels, something stirred. Without warning, the ivy that had clung tightly to its bark suddenly came alive. Its vines unraveled with unnatural speed, slipping downward like a striking snake. In the blink of an eye, it lunged toward Alveric, cold, coiling tendrils snaking through the air, and wrapped themselves around his throat, gripping tight like they meant to drag him into the shadows of the wood. Alveric's father's sword flashed just in time. A heartbeat later and it would have been too late. The ivy struck fast like a serpent, wrapping around his arms and legs, clutching him tightly like it meant to turn him into part of the forest forever. Vines tangled around him like they gripped ancient castle ruins, but with swift, sharp strokes, he slashed through the green coils. More vines kept coming, relentless and furious, until he swung hard and severed the thick main stem, connecting it to the tree. The attack slowed, but only for a moment. Behind him came a sharp hissing sound, like wind slicing through grass, and he spun just in time to see another vine creature leap from a nearby tree. Its leafy arms spread wide like wings as it flew toward him, wrapping itself around his left shoulder in a tight, unbreakable grip, like it meant to never let go. With a fierce yell, Alveric struck again. His sword sliced through the vines with a clean arc, freeing himself just as the first ivy, now cut short, thrashed on the forest floor, lashing wildly in frustration, unable to reach him anymore. Still, the enchanted woods were alive, and every tree seemed ready to strike. Once Alveric shook off the last of the choking ivy and caught his breath, he quickly stepped back, just far enough that the creeping vines couldn't touch him, but close enough for his sword to still bite. The ivy hesitated for a moment, then slowly slithered back, trying to lure him forward again like a predator playing dead. And when Alveric took even a single step, it struck again, fast, furious, and wild. But no matter how tight the ivy's grip, his blade was sharper. Though his arms were bruised and scratches ran along his face, Alveric fought with grim focus. With every swing of his father's longsword, leaves flew, tendrils snapped, and sap spilled like blood. Eventually, the ivy recoiled with a hiss, climbing back up the tree it had come from, its mangled ends twitching in retreat. Alveric exhaled hard, sweat and blood mixing on his brow. He turned to study the path ahead with new caution. Now he understood. The forest wasn't just enchanted, it was alive and watching. His eyes scanned the line of towering pine trees, their dark green canopies looming above like soldiers in formation. The two trees before him had been damaged, their ivy cut back in the battle. If he moved precisely between them, the vines wouldn't be able to reach. He stepped forward carefully, but then froze. One of the pine trees moved just slightly, but enough to close the gap, enough to block his way, enough to trap him. Alveric's heart pounded. He didn't hesitate. Reaching back over his shoulder, he drew the magical sword, the one forged not by man, but by stars and spells. The time for ordinary steel was over. The real battle had just begun. Alveric slid his father's sword back into its scabbard at his side, respectful, but no longer enough. Slowly, deliberately, he reached over his shoulder and unsheathed the magical sword. As it cleared the scabbard, a faint shimmer pulsed along its edge, like moonlight caught in a blade. Without wasting a second, he marched straight toward the pine that had moved. The ivy sprang again, wild and fast. But Alveric was faster. With one clean, glowing arc of the magical sword, he sliced through the ivy mid-air. This time it didn't fight back. It fell, not writhing, not alive, just a lifeless heap of ordinary green, like garden ivy after a storm. No menace, no magic. Then Alveric turned to the tree itself. He swung once at the trunk. The blade struck clean. Only a small chip flew out, no bigger than what any regular sword might cause. But the effect was instant. The tree shivered. A deep tremble ran through its tall form, shaking the needles at its peak. And then, just like a spell breaking, the dark, watchful aura that had clung to it vanished. Its bark lost its sheen. Its stance relaxed. Whatever enchantment had twisted its spirit was gone. Now, it was just a tree. Alveric didn't pause. With the magical sword still in hand, he stepped deeper into the wood, ready for whatever Elfland would throw at him next. He had barely taken a few steps when a soft rustling whispered behind him, like the sound of wind brushing treetops. But there was no wind. Alveric spun around, alert. What he saw made his blood chill. The pine trees were moving, slowly, silently, purposefully. They were creeping forward in the stillness, their roots gliding almost imperceptibly over the mossy floor, keeping a safe distance from his sword's deadly reach. But while they stayed behind him, on his flanks they advanced faster, inch by inch, more and more of them. The forest itself seemed to be closing in, trees pressing against trees, forming a tightening crescent around him. What was open space a moment ago was now a wall of trunks and shadows, and it was closing fast. If he stayed put or turned back, he'd be trapped, crushed alive, no escape. But Alveric had already sensed something strange. The magic in this forest moved slowly, not like a living wild force, but like something ancient, tired, or distracted. He didn't waste another second. Tightening his grip on the magical sword, he broke into a sprint, straight ahead, eyes locked on the thinnest part of the forest wall. He wasn't just betting on his sword now. He was betting on speed, instinct, and the possibility that whoever controlled this dark wood wasn't watching closely enough. And in that moment, the trees behind him groaned like old bones waking up. But Alveric didn't look back. He ran through shadows and spells into the unknown heart of Elfland. Alveric didn't stop. He charged straight through the forest, cutting down everything in his path. Tree after tree, enchanted or not, felt the bite of his magical sword. Each strike pulsed with ancient power, the glowing runes etched in that otherworldly metal shimmering with a light not of earth, forged beyond the reach of our sun. Wherever the blade touched, enchantment shattered. Towering oaks with twisted, haunted trunks groaned as their dark magic dissolved. Their glowing bark dimmed. Their strange whispers fell silent. In mere moments, they were nothing but ordinary trees, dull, lifeless, stripped of the mystery that once wrapped around them like a shroud. Alveric moved with speed and purpose, faster than the lumbering, creeping pines that had tried to trap him. He was a blur, sword in hand, cloak flying behind him, eyes burning with resolve. And in his wake, the enchanted forest fell apart, not with fire or thunder, but with silence. A trail of powerless trees stood behind him now, still and plain, as if they had never known magic at all. The forest was trying to stop him, but Alveric was unstoppable. And then, all at once, Alveric stepped out of the dark, whispering forest, and into a glowing world of pure wonder. the radiant emerald lawns of the Elf King's realm. The change was breathtaking, like stepping from shadow into a dream. The grass shimmered as if each blade held a tiny star. Dewdrops sparkled on the surface like scattered diamonds, catching the soft blue light of a sky that didn't belong to Earth. It wasn't morning here, not truly, but something older, something deeper, a twilight that felt eternal. The air itself glowed with an oceanic hue, not quite sky, not quite sea, just a luminous blue that wrapped around everything like a soft spell. And the flowers, they bloomed with colors so delicate they almost seemed to hum. Pinks, violets, silvers, all of them waking slowly as though they too had just stepped out of a dream. No wind stirred, no footsteps had ever crushed this grass. Only the tiniest of wild creatures had touched it. The trees that ringed the lawn still held the mystery of night in their dark green leaves, forming a natural barrier between this sacred space and the outside world. It was not like any land known to men. It was more like the ocean floor, silent, deep, and glowing, where colors move differently and time itself seems to pause. Like those blue-green seaweeds that swayed gently beneath Mediterranean waves, these lawns shimmered with that same fluid magic. Except here it wasn't water, it was air, the enchanted breathing air of Elfland. And Alveric stood still for a moment, overwhelmed. He had finally reached the heart of the unknown, and it was more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. Alveric stood still, mesmerized. The lawns before him glowed softly in the enchanted twilight, each blade of grass lit with dew that shimmered like crushed moonlight. The colors were unlike anything found in the mortal world, lush emeralds glowing beneath a sky stained with the last breath of starlight. Surrounding the lawns, a sea of flowers bloomed in breathtaking abundance, blazing shades of deep mauve and fiery rose that made Earth's richest sunsets seem faded and weak in comparison. Even the rarest orchids from our world would have bowed in shame before the radiant blossoms of Elfland. Behind him, the enchanted forest loomed like a shadowy memory, dark and heavy, as if night itself still clung to its trees. And just beyond the ring of flowers, rising out from the edge of that mysterious wood like something summoned from a dream, stood the palace. Its towering spires shimmered with an impossible brilliance, its gates flung wide as though waiting just for him. The archways sparkled as if carved from crystal stars, and its windows gleamed a blue deeper than any summer night sky known to man. So rich, so pure, it hurt to look away. The palace didn't seem built. It felt sung into existence, as if music itself had shaped its towers, and moonlight had whispered its walls into being. And in that moment, Alveric knew. No tale on earth could ever truly describe what stood before him. Only song, in its purest form, might come close. Alveric stood frozen at the edge of the enchanted woods, his sword gripped in one hand, his breath caught in his chest. Before him stretched the glowing lawns of Elfland, dreamlike and perfect, yet all his focus was fixed on one radiant figure. From a grand starlit portal of the palace, she stepped forth, the daughter of the king of Elfland. She moved like moonlight drifting across still water, serene, weightless, otherworldly. Her presence seemed to hush the very air. She walked slowly across the dew-drenched grass, unaware of Alveric watching from the shadows. Each delicate step kissed the earth for only a moment, barely bending the emerald blades beneath her, which rose again after her passing, just as wildflowers sway when touched by a butterfly's wing, only to dance back into place. She didn't look around, she wasn't searching. She was simply part of the magic, born from it, flowing with it, a vision so pure it silenced the world around her. And as she glided past, Alveric remained utterly still, frozen like stone. He didn't move. He couldn't even breathe. Even if the haunted pines had crept up behind him, he wouldn't have noticed. But they didn't dare cross the edge of the forest, not where she walked. Those lawns were sacred now, untouchable. She wore a crown that looked as if it had been carved from moonlight and frozen sapphires, glowing faintly with a celestial blue. Her presence bathed the gardens in a quiet radiance, like a sunrise softly blooming after an eternal night on a world closer to the sun than ours has ever been. And then as she came near the edge where Alveric stood hidden in awe, she turned. Her gaze met his. For a moment her eyes widened with a flicker of delicate wonder, gentle, curious, timeless. She had never before seen a man from the lands beyond Elfland, from the mortal world of grass and stone. In that silent glance, a story began, one written between two souls from different realms. Alveric stared into her eyes, completely lost, silent, breathless, unable to move. Time itself seemed to pause. Yes, it was her, the Princess of Elfland, Lyrazel, in all her otherworldly beauty. But then, as his gaze rose to her crown, he realized it wasn't made of sapphires. It was sculpted from glistening, untouched ice, clear, fragile, eternal, like it had been carved from the heart of a winter that never melted. She looked at him, curious yet calm, and asked softly, "Who are you?" And her voice, it wasn't just sound. It was like the whisper of 1,000 tiny shards of ice drifting across a northern lake in spring, carried by a cool wind under a pale sun, delicate, chilling, magical. Alveric finally found his voice, though it felt smaller now. I come from the fields that are mapped and known." And then, she sighed, a soft fleeting breath, like a petal falling from a flower that never knew time. For a moment, her eyes looked far away, beyond the glowing lawns of Elfland, beyond the edge of the magic, into a world she had only heard about in ancient songs. She thought of those fields, the ones mapped and known, where life dances through time like sunlight over rippling rivers. She'd heard the stories, tales whispered by elfin minstrels of how life flows there, vibrant, fleeting, beautiful. She imagined the laughter of children, the colors of changing seasons, the quiet wisdom in growing old. Moments so small, yet full of meaning. Moments she had never touched, and for the first time, she longed. And when Alveric saw her sigh, that gentle ache in her breath for the world he had come from, he began to speak of it. At first, just a little, a mention of meadows kissed by sunrise, of winds that carried the scent of spring over the hills of the Vale of Earl. His voice was soft, almost unsure, as though trying to describe music to someone who had never heard sound. But her eyes sparkled with curiosity, like moonlight trembling on still water. And so she asked him more. "What is your land like? Your people? Your sky?" With every question, he opened up further, not with pride, but with wonder, sharing memories of Earth like firelight stories passed down through generations. He spoke of children laughing in the fields, of the way animals follow ancient instincts under golden skies, of the old women who told tales by the hearth, tales shaped from centuries of joy, struggle, and dreams. He didn't try to explain everything. No one life can speak for all of Earth. But he offered what he could, legends, fables, and the quiet truths that only those who live close to the land ever truly know. And she listened, like someone hearing stars for the first time. And so on the edge of those enchanted lawns, where unknown flowers bloomed in colors Earth had never dreamed, with the shimmering palace behind them, a vision too magical for any song to capture, and the mysterious forest watching silently from the shadows. They stood together, a mortal man and the daughter of a timeless realm, and spoke softly of simple, forgotten things. They spoke of the quiet wisdom passed from wrinkled hands to eager ears, of when to sow seeds in spring, and how roses and mayflowers bloom like promises in the heart of summer. Of harvest time, when golden fields dance in the wind, and the air smells of earth and ripened fruit. He told her how old women whispered healing secrets over herbs and how the wind had its moods. A soft breeze for autumn, a wild gale for winter, each season carrying its own voice across the fields of earth. They talked of animals too, how foxes know when storms are near, how birds remember the way home across endless skies, and how nature in all her quiet brilliance teaches more than any book can. And as the magic of Elfland shimmered around them, they stood at the edge of two worlds, sharing truths so old, so human, that even the stars might have paused to listen. And then, from the shimmering silence of the palace gates they came, 4 knights in gleaming silver armor, gliding like ghosts across the glowing lawns. Their faces were hidden behind dark visors, expressionless and cold as if carved from shadow and steel. They were the eternal guardians of the palace, silent sentinels forged by enchantment and duty. In all their centuries of watchful existence, they had never dared to dream of the princess. They had never looked her in the eye, never removed their helmets, not even when kneeling before her in devotion. Yet now they moved with purpose, bound by a powerful oath, an ancient vow spoken in forgotten tongues, etched into their souls like fire into stone. No man was ever to speak to her. No mortal was to stand in her presence if he came through the cursed and sacred wood. And now, with that oath burning on their tongues like a spell, they marched toward Alveric. Their footsteps were silent, but the air trembled with their approach, and even the enchanted grass seemed to shrink beneath their steel. Lyrazel watched them approach, her eyes filled with sorrow, but she couldn't stop them. They came under her father's command, a law spoken long ago in a time when stars were still young. She knew too well. What the king of Elfland declared could never be taken back, not even by himself. His words had been shaped by fate, not choice. Alveric stood still for a breath, watching them close in. Their armor shimmered with an unearthly brilliance, brighter than any silver forged by human hands, like the towers sung of in ancient songs, like moonlight frozen into steel. But Alveric didn't flinch. He drew the sword of his father, steady and sure. Its slender blade caught the strange light, and he gripped it tight, searching for a weakness in their mystic armor. A gap, a joint, some flaw. With his right hand on the hilt, he raised the blade, sharp with defiance. With his left, he balanced himself, ready not just to fight, but to stand between worlds for the one who made him forget fear. The first knight lunged forward, his blade flashing like captured lightning. Alveric raised his sword just in time, steel clashing against steel in a blinding spark. But the moment their weapons met, a jolt like a thunderbolt surged through his arm. So fierce it knocked the blade clean from his hand. In that instant, he understood. No weapon forged in the lands of men could stand against the power of Elfland. Without hesitation, he reached for the other, the enchanted sword, the one forged by magic and mystery. As his fingers closed around its hilt, a strange calm flooded through him, like touching something alive, something ancient and wise. He met the next strike. This time, no shock. Only a soft humming tremor ran through the blade, a music in metal that danced through his arms and settled in his chest, like the whisper of forgotten songs or the heartbeat of a star. The four knights pressed on, guardians of Lyrazel, bound by vows older than memory. But Alveric stood firm, his glowing sword alive in his hand. Not just a weapon now, but a companion, a beacon of courage, pulsing with the power of another world. But as Alveric continued blocking strike after strike, something shifted in the enchanted sword. It pulsed in his grip, impatient, almost alive, not made for defense, but for bold attacks and impossible quests. It yearned for motion, for lightning-fast blows, and it pulled his arm with a will of its own. Suddenly, his hand was no longer guiding the blade. The blade was guiding him. With a flash like a storm breaking loose, it sliced through the enchanted armor as if it were nothing but thin silver leaf. From the gap spilled a thick, shimmering blood, not red, but glistening with strange colors, like spilled moonlight mixed with oil. One knight fell, his body crumbling with the weight of centuries. Then another, with a sound like glass shattering in a dream. Alveric stood, breathing hard, his heart beating in rhythm with the living sword's glow. No longer afraid, but lit from within by battle-born fire. Only two remained, Alveric and one final knight, taller than the rest, his armor etched with runes that shimmered like flame. He moved differently, slower, but stronger, as though he carried ancient magic deeper than his fallen brothers. This last knight didn't just fight, he resisted the sword's will, and Alveric knew the real battle had only just begun. And it was true. This final knight was no ordinary guardian. When the Elf King had first breathed life into the enchanted guard, this knight had been the very first to be bound by the spell, at a time when the king's magic was still fresh, fierce, and full of wild wonder. Every rune etched onto his armor, every thread of power woven into his being, was soaked in that original, untamed sorcery, the kind of magic that later spells could only try to imitate. There was something ancient about him, something more primal and dangerous than the others. It pulsed from his blade, shimmered through his armor, and made the air around him feel heavy with silence. Yet even with all that power, Alveric sensed through the vibrations in his enchanted sword, the subtle language of steel and spell, that this knight still lacked three master runes. Those three sacred runes, the witch had whispered once, had never been spoken aloud. Not by any wizard, not by any book, but were held in secrecy by the Elf King himself. used only to guard his own presence, to veil himself in power that no magic could touch. For the witch to even know of their existence, she must have ridden her broom through the veils of worlds, flown straight into Elfland under moonless skies, and dared to speak in secret with the king alone. And now, Alveric knew. He faced a warrior soaked in old magic, but not yet touched by the true heart of Elfland's deepest power. And then, the sword from distant worlds struck with the fury of a thunderstorm. Each blow cracked through the air like lightning tearing through the sky. Green sparks burst from the elf knight's enchanted armor, and when blades clashed, crimson sparks flew like fire raining from the heavens. Thick, glowing elvish blood began to spill, slow and heavy, sliding down the knight's silver cuirass, as if the magic itself was bleeding away. From the edge of the lawn, hidden in golden moonlight, Lyrazel watched, her eyes wide with awe, her breath caught between fear and love. She watched the man from Earth fight against everything her father had created. The battle pushed deeper into the forest. Their weapons clashed against tree trunks and branches came crashing down, cut by wild steel. Leaves swirled like fireflies caught in a storm. And all the while, the runes on Alveric's blade sang, a fierce, victorious song, echoing with joy as they struck against ancient magic. The sword wasn't just fighting, it was roaring, alive with purpose. Then, in the darkest part of the forest, surrounded by fallen limbs and shattered spellbound trees, Alveric struck a single mighty blow. It sounded like a thunderbolt tearing through an old oak. The elf knight fell. Silence. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then, Lyrazel ran to Alveric's side, her gown flowing like mist through the broken trees. Her voice was urgent, trembling. "Quick," she said. "We must go now. My father, he holds 3 runes still." She couldn't bring herself to speak them aloud. Those runes were too dark, too powerful, too final. Alveric turned to her, still catching his breath. "Where?" he asked, sword still warm in his hand. She looked toward the world beyond the forest, her eyes full of hope and longing. "To the fields you know," she whispered, and they ran, towards the mortal world, towards freedom, towards the fragile light of love. Chapter 4. Alveric returns to Earth, after many years. Through the shadowy forest once more, Alveric led Lyrazel, the trees whispering behind them like echoes of magic fading. She glanced back just once, her eyes lingering on those otherworldly gardens, blossoms glowing with colors no earthly poet had ever fully dreamed, meadows bathed in the soft shimmer of eternal twilight. Then, with a breath full of sorrow and wonder, she turned away, urging him to hurry. Alveric guided them swiftly, choosing the path lined with trees he had once freed from enchantment, now silent sentinels watching his return. And Lyrazel didn't let Alveric pause, not even for a heartbeat. She pulled him gently but urgently, away from the palace that now shimmered in the distance like a fading dream, the kind only sung of in ancient songs. Behind them, from beyond the lifeless line where Alveric's enchanted sword had struck, the forest began to stir. The other trees, tall, eerie, half-aware, moved slowly toward them, their trunks groaning like old wood remembering magic. They cast strange glances at their fallen kin, trees whose branches now hung limp and hollow, drained of all enchantment. But each time one came too close, Lyrazel raised her hand high and the forest obeyed. The trees froze mid-step, as if bound by an unseen force. Still, she whispered, "Faster, we must go," her voice both urgent and full of fear, urging Alveric onward through the thinning woods of fading wonder. Lyrazel knew exactly what was coming. She could already picture her father, the Elf King, ascending the great bronze stairs of one of the silver spires that pierced the eternal sky. She knew he would step out onto a high, gleaming balcony and chant a rune too powerful for any world to resist. And now, she heard it. The metallic echo of his footsteps rang through the enchanted woods like distant thunder, growing louder. She and Alveric sprinted across the plain that stretched beyond the forest, the sky still glowing with that endless dreamlike light of Elfland. Again and again, she glanced back over her shoulder, eyes wide with fear, urging Alveric to move faster, faster. The Elf King's boots pounded slowly, relentlessly, on the 1,000 shining steps, each step a warning. Ahead of them, the edge of twilight shimmered like smoke clinging to the horizon, dull and ghostly. If only they could reach it in time. But then, high above the palace that mortals had only heard of in the saddest songs, a door creaked open. She saw it, a shadow moving behind golden doors on a balcony lit with moonfire. "Alas!" she cried, breath catching in her throat. And just then, like a whisper from another world, the scent of briar roses drifted through the air. It was the smell of earth, the fields they knew, hope. Alveric felt no exhaustion. His heart was burning with purpose, and his body still carried the fire of youth. And Lyrazel, she was timeless, untouched by age or weariness, her steps as light as the wind. Hand in hand, they ran. Her fingers curled tightly around his, their pace unbroken, their fear forgotten in the rush of escape and hope. Far behind them, the Elf King raised his silver beard to the sky. His eyes burned with ancient power, and just as his voice began to chant a rune, a spell so devastating it could only be spoken once in all eternity, a rune against which no force from the mortal world could stand, they crossed the edge of twilight. Their feet stepped into the smoke-hued border where Elfland ended, and Earth began. The moment they passed through, the air behind them trembled. The rune echoed, unfinished, lost to the magic it tried to command. Its sound cracked across Elfland like a distant storm, but it could no longer reach her. Lyrazel was gone from those lands forever. As Lyrazel stepped into the world of men, the fields we call home, her eyes sparkled with wonder. Everything was new to her, just as her own world had once been mysterious to us. The rolling meadows, the uneven haystacks scattered like sleeping giants across the land. They made her laugh with delight. She found them odd, but charming. A skylark soared overhead, singing a high, cheerful tune. Lyrazel looked up with curiosity and tried to speak to it in the soft, musical language of Elfland. But the bird didn't respond. It just kept flying, lost in its own joy. She smiled gently and moved on, already distracted by the next marvel. The land around her shimmered with life. It wasn't the season of bluebells anymore, though she had expected them. Instead, tall foxgloves swayed in the breeze. Wild roses opened like secrets among the hedgerows, and the white blossoms of May were already gone. Alveric noticed this too, but he couldn't explain it. The seasons seemed out of sync, as if time itself had bent when they crossed into this world. But Lyrazel didn't question it. To her, everything was a gift, a wonder. She walked on with shining eyes, discovering Earth like a dream come to life. It was early morning. The golden sun had just begun to stretch its light across the open fields, bathing everything in soft, warm hues. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and distant blossoms. And Lyrazel, child of starlight and dreams, walked through it all as if she'd entered a living painting. She was enchanted by the simplest things, the shimmer of dew on clover leaves, the wobbling wheel of an old wooden cart, the yellow glow of buttercups swaying in the wind. To anyone else, these were ordinary, forgettable sights, but to her, they were magical. She gasped in delight at a fluttering moth, laughed out loud at the clumsy sound of a cow lowing in the distance, and clapped her hands like a child discovering a world of hidden treasures. Alveric, walking beside her, saw the world anew through her eyes. Even the dirt road, even the chirp of a sparrow, everything felt touched by her wonder. And then, in a quiet moment when sunlight kissed her hair, he noticed something had changed. Her crown of ice, the shining, enchanted symbol of her elvish royalty, was gone, melted, disappeared without a trace. And yet she was more radiant than ever, free, human, alive. As if, in shedding her crown, she had truly stepped into this world, not as a visitor, but as someone who had chosen to stay. And so, the princess of moonlit realms, Lyrazel, left behind the palace spoken of only in ancient songs, a place where dreams breathed and stars whispered. She walked hand in hand with Alveric, across the rolling meadows of earth. These were no longer the enchanted gardens of Elfland, but the familiar lands of men, fields shaped by centuries, touched by time, yet somehow eternal in their quiet simplicity. They journeyed under the changing sky, through golden hours and soft winds, until evening painted the world in amber and rose. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land that Alveric had once called home. And at last, with tired feet but hearts full of wonder, they arrived at his doorstep, the house waiting in silence, unaware that a legend had just stepped across its threshold. Everything had changed at the castle of Earl. As Alveric and Lyrazel stepped through the old stone gateway, a guard stood there, someone Alveric recognized, though now older, slower, with silver in his beard and lines across his brow. The man stared at them in disbelief, as if seeing a ghost return from legend. Inside the castle, on the grand staircase and through the long corridors, they passed familiar faces. Servants and stewards who once moved swiftly in youth, now pausing in confusion, blinking as if their eyes betrayed them. Alveric looked around, stunned. Time had touched everything. The walls were the same, yet older. The air held a stillness, and in that moment it struck him. Though he had lived just one endless blue day in Elfland, 10 long years had passed in the world he once knew. Everyone's heard tales of Elfland, how time flows differently there, like a forgotten river winding through dreams. And yet, when it truly happens before your eyes, it still strikes like thunder. Alveric turned to Lyrazel, his voice low with disbelief. "It's been 10, maybe 12 years," he said, staring at the now unfamiliar halls of his own home. But Lyrazel just smiled gently, her eyes full of wonder at the world around her, as if he had merely told her he'd misplaced a trinket. Time meant nothing to her. It was not a river, not a weight, not a thief. In Elfland, time is a myth, a thing unnoticed. She had no sense of loss. She couldn't know what 10 years meant to human hearts, to memories, to change, to life. For her, it was only a step across a threshold. They told Alveric the truth that hit like a quiet storm. "Your father is long passed on." He stood still, the words sinking slowly into him like evening shadows on stone. One of the older men stepped forward, voice soft, eyes kind. He passed peacefully, without worry, without rushing. He left this world smiling, believing you would fulfill his last wish. They said the old lord had known something of the strange rhythm of Elfland, of how time slips and bends there. And so he waited with the same serene patience that dreams carry, because he understood that those who cross between this world and that timeless realm must carry a part of Elfland's stillness in their souls. Up the quiet valley, as dusk melted into night, the sharp ringing of a hammer echoed, clear and steady. It was the blacksmith at work, still shaping metal with fire and rhythm, even after all these years. This was the same blacksmith who had once stood tall as the voice of the villagers, speaking boldly in the long red hall before the Lord of Earl. And astonishingly, those men, his companions from that day, still lived. For though time drifted gently through the Vale of Earl, as it does through all the lands we know, it moved with the patience of the hills and the stillness of old traditions, not like the hurried pace of distant cities where years vanish like smoke. From the soft twilight of the valley, Alveric and Lyrazel made their way to the humble chapel of the village priest, the Friar. The small stone building stood quiet under the wide sky, its wooden door weathered, its windows glowing dimly with candlelight. Inside, surrounded by shelves of old books and walls decorated with trinkets he had gathered over the years from traveling fairs, wooden carvings, painted plates, and faded ribbons, the Friar looked up as they entered. The moment his eyes fell on Lyrazel, his breath caught. She seemed to glow amidst the worn, ordinary space, her presence too bright, too ethereal, like a starlight that had wandered into a cottage. He saw in her beauty something unearthly, and fear crept gently into his heart. Alveric asked him to marry them, to bind them in the name of Christ. But the Friar hesitated. He turned to Lyrazel and softly, almost reverently, asked where she had come from. With a light laugh and eyes full of wonder, she replied, "Elfland." The priest's face paled. He clasped his hands tightly and spoke with concern in his voice. "Child, that land lies beyond the reach of salvation. It is not blessed by our Lord." But Lyrazel only smiled, calm and untouched by fear. Elfland had never known sorrow, and here in this simple world, all that mattered to her now was Alveric. Troubled and unsure, the Friar turned to his ancient books, searching for an answer, for some forgotten guidance on what to do when a man of earth brings home a bride from beyond the stars. For a long time, the chapel was filled with nothing but the rustling of old pages and the soft rhythm of the friar's breath as he read in silence. Alveric and Lyrazel stood still before him, hand in hand, like two souls caught between two worlds. Finally, the friar closed the ancient book with a gentle thud and looked up. "There is no mention of Elfland," he said softly, "but I have found a rite meant for a mermaid who once left the sea behind for the love of a man." He paused, thoughtful. "The sea and Elfland are alike in one way. They lie beyond salvation, beyond our sacred reach. But if the mermaid could be wed, so can you." He nodded to himself and called for his small bell and the ceremonial candles, their flames flickering to life like stars in the shadows of the chapel. Then he turned solemnly to Lyrazel, his voice now slow and careful, as if each word held great weight. Holding the book open before him, he said, "You must renounce Elfland. You must forsake its magic, its dreams, its timeless ways." He began to read aloud the ancient vows, the words sacred and strange, meant to separate the bride from the world she came from. The moment felt like a soft tearing of silk, as if two realities were being pulled apart. Lyrazel, radiant yet calm, listened to the priest's voice, knowing that her heart had already chosen. And so, in the quiet glow of candlelight, between the past she came from and the future she stepped into, the ceremony began. "Good priest," Lyrazel said softly, her voice like wind through silver leaves. "No words spoken in this world can ever cross the border into Elfland. And it's a blessing that they can't. For my father, the king, holds 3 ancient runes. If even a whisper of your holy spell reached his ears, those runes could destroy this book and silence your words forever. I will not cast spells against my father." The friar's face grew grave. "But I cannot marry a man of Christ to someone from a realm where salvation has no meaning," he said. "It is against all that this place stands for." Alveric stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Please," he said, his voice thick with love and desperation. "She has given up everything to be with me." Lyrazel looked at Alveric, her gaze full of a quiet fierceness. She turned back to the friar and said, "Then I will speak the words from your book, though know this. If ever these vows crossed into Elfland, my father's magic would tear them apart." The friar hesitated, then finally nodded. The bell was brought in, its ring clear and steady, and the candles were lit, their golden flames casting dancing shadows on the humble chapel walls. And there, under the low wooden beams of the friar's small house, surrounded by the scent of old wood and burning wax, the two were wed. The friar used the old rite once meant for a mermaid who left the sea, words born for magic walkers who chose love over their enchanted homes. And though Elfland watched from far beyond the twilight border, it could not touch them there.